Bullies ripped her new top. Her flying elbow took him down fast. Kira Voss adjusted her backpack straps as she walked through the crowded hallways of Jefferson High School, her dark eyes scanning for the quickest route to her next class. At 17, she had the kind of understated presence that allowed her to blend into crowds effortlessly. Her petite frame, standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, made her appear fragile to those who didn't know better. Her straight black hair fell in a curtain around her face, often serving as a shield from unwanted attention. Born to Korean immigrant parents, Kira had learned early that keeping a low profile was often the safest strategy in a school where standing out could make you a target. What her classmates didn't know was that Kira had been training in Taekwondo since she was 8 years old. Her father, a former national competitor in South Korea, had insisted she learn to defend herself, but he had also taught her something equally important. Discipline meant knowing when not to fight. True strength, he would tell her, is having the power to destroy your enemies, but choosing a better path. These words echoed in her mind every day as she navigated the social minefield of high school. The trouble had started 3 weeks ago when Kira accidentally bumped into Blake Morrison in the cafeteria. Blake, the self-appointed king of Jefferson High's social hierarchy, stood 6 feet tall with the kind of quarterback build that made teachers look the other way when he got too loud in class. His sandy hair was always perfectly styled, and his expensive clothes announced his family's wealth to anyone who cared to notice. What made Blake particularly dangerous wasn't just his physical presence, but his ability to rally others to his cause. "Watch where you're going, foreign girl," Blake had sneered that first day, loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. Kira had simply apologized and walked away, but something in her quiet dignity had clearly irritated him. Perhaps it was the way she didn't cower or beg for forgiveness. Perhaps it was how she met his eyes for just a moment before turning away. Whatever it was, Blake had decided she needed to be put in her place. His main accomplice was Tyler Hendricks, a lanky redhead with a cruel smile who seemed to live for moments when he could watch others suffer. Tyler was the kind of person who would record fights on his phone and post them online, cackling as he watched the views climb. The third member of their group was Jessica Palmer, a girl whose beauty was matched only by her vicious tongue. Jessica had perfected the art of social destruction, able to ruin reputations with a few well-placed words. The bullying had started small. A shoulder check in the hallway here, a snide comment there. But it had escalated quickly. They would knock books from her hands, trip her on the stairs, and whisper cruel jokes about her appearance just loud enough for her to hear. The teachers at Jefferson High seemed to operate under the philosophy that if they didn't see it directly, it wasn't their problem. Mrs. Rodriguez, Kira's English teacher, had once witnessed Blake accidentally spill water on Kira's homework, but had simply sighed and told Kira she could turn it in the next day. Kira endured it all with the same quiet dignity that had first attracted Blake's attention. She would clean up the mess, gather her scattered papers, and continue with her day. Her classmates, grateful not to be targets themselves, would look away or pretend they hadn't seen anything. In the complex ecosystem of high school social dynamics, Kira had become the designated victim, the one whose suffering allowed others to feel safe. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late October. Kira had saved up money from her part-time job at her uncle's restaurant to buy a new top she'd been eyeing for weeks. It was a simple but elegant piece in deep blue, the kind of clothing that made her feel confident and pretty. She had worn it to school that day, allowing herself a rare moment of optimism about fitting in. She was walking past the trophy case near the gym when Blake and his crew spotted her. "Well, well," Blake said, his voice carrying that particular tone that made Kira's stomach drop. "Look what the delivery girl is wearing today. Did you steal that from the lost and found?" Tyler laughed, pulling out his phone as he always did when Blake was about to perform. Maybe her parents bought it with tip money from their restaurant. You know how they are with money. Kira tried to walk past them, but Blake stepped into her path. "I'm talking to you," he said, his voice hardening. "It's rude to ignore people." "I'm just trying to get to class," Kira said quietly, her hands instinctively moving to protect her new top. "Did you hear that?" Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "She thinks she's too good to talk to us now. Maybe that new shirt is giving her ideas." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Blake reached out and grabbed the fabric of Kira's top, his fingers twisting in the delicate material. "Let's see how good this really is," he said, and then he pulled. The sound of tearing fabric echoed through the hallway as Kira's beautiful new top ripped down the front, leaving her scrambling to cover herself with her cardigan. The small crowd of students who had gathered to watch burst into laughter. Tyler's phone captured every moment of her humiliation as she stood there, her face burning with shame and anger. But it was what Blake said next that truly broke something inside her. "Maybe stick to clothes from your own country next time," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This American stuff is too good for you anyway." Kira bent to pick up her torn top, her hands shaking with rage. As she stood up, she caught sight of David Chen watching from across the hallway. David was in her AP literature class, a quiet guy with kind eyes who had always been friendly to her. He was one of the few people at Jefferson High who treated her like a human being rather than an inconvenience. She had harbored a secret crush on him for months, and now he had witnessed her ultimate humiliation. The look of sympathy and anger in David's eyes was somehow worse than all the laughter combined. He started to move toward her, clearly wanting to help, but Blake's crew was already dispersing, their entertainment over. Kira clutched her cardigan tighter and ran for the nearest bathroom, David's concerned voice calling her name echoing behind her. That afternoon, Kira sat in her car in the school parking lot, staring at her ruined top. Her father's words came back to her. "True strength is having the power to destroy your enemies, but choosing a better path." But what if the better path wasn't working? What if quiet dignity was just another word for cowardice? She drove home and went straight to the garage, where her father's old training equipment waited. The heavy bag hung in the corner, worn smooth by years of use. Kira changed into her training clothes and began to work, her fists and feet finding their rhythm against the leather. Each strike was Blake's smug face, each kick was Tyler's cruel laughter. Over the next few days, Kira's routine changed. She still attended classes, still did her homework, still worked at the restaurant, but she also spent hours in the garage, pushing her body to remember skills that had grown rusty from disuse. Her father noticed but said nothing, simply nodding approvingly when he saw her practicing forms in the backyard. The bullying continued, but something had shifted in Kira's demeanor. She still didn't fight back, but there was a new quality to her silence. Where before she had seemed defeated, now she seemed to be waiting. Blake and his crew noticed the change, but misinterpreted it as fear. They escalated their tactics, emboldened by what they saw as her complete submission. David Chen had noticed the change too. He had started walking the same routes as Kira between classes, not obviously following, but making sure he was nearby. When Blake's crew targeted her, David would appear, his presence alone sometimes enough to make them think twice. He never said much, but his steady support gave Kira strength during the hardest moments. It was David who inadvertently triggered the final confrontation. On a Friday afternoon, he had worked up the courage to approach Kira at her locker. "Hey," he said, his voice gentle, "I was wondering if you'd like to go to the movies this weekend. There's this new action film playing at the theater downtown." Kira felt her heart skip. Despite everything that had happened, David was asking her out. For a moment, the constant stress and humiliation faded away. "I'd like that," she said, allowing herself a genuine smile. "Great," David said, his own smile lighting up his face. "I'll pick you up at 7 on Saturday." "Perfect," Kira replied, and for the first time in weeks, she felt genuinely happy. Unfortunately, Jessica Palmer had been listening from around the corner. By Monday morning, the entire school knew about Kira and David's movie date. But Jessica had twisted the story, spreading rumors that Kira had thrown herself at David, that she was desperate for any male attention she could get. Blake saw an opportunity. If he could humiliate Kira in front of David, he could kill two birds with one stone. He had never liked David anyway, seeing him as too quiet, too studious, too decent for Blake's taste. The confrontation came during lunch on Tuesday. Kira was sitting with David at a table near the windows, actually laughing at something he had said. For a moment, she looked like any other teenager enjoying time with someone she cared about. Blake couldn't stand it. "Well, well," Blake announced as he approached their table, Tyler and Jessica flanking him. "If it isn't the happy couple. How was your little date, David? Did she make you pay for everything, or does she actually have money?" David stood up, his jaw tight. "Leave us alone, Blake." "Oh, the boyfriend's going to defend her honor," Tyler laughed, his phone already recording. "This should be good." Blake turned his attention to Kira, who had gone very still. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said the other day about not being able to afford nice clothes. Maybe David can buy you a new top since you clearly can't manage it yourself." "That's enough," David said, stepping between Blake and Kira. "Is it?" Blake pushed David aside with casual strength. "Because I think your girlfriend needs to learn her place in this school, and her place is at the bottom, where she belongs." Before Kira could react, Blake grabbed her lunch tray and dumped it over her head. Cold soup and sandwich pieces dripped down her face and onto her clothes. The cafeteria erupted in laughter and gasps. Tyler's phone captured every moment, but Blake wasn't done. As Kira sat there covered in food, he leaned down and whispered just loud enough for David to hear, "You could do so much better than this foreign trash. What would your parents think if they knew you were slumming it with someone like her?" That was when something snapped inside Kira. Not the public humiliation, not the ruined clothes, not even the cruel words. It was the way Blake was trying to poison her relationship with David, the one good thing she had found in this nightmare of a school. Kira stood up slowly, soup still dripping from her hair. Her movements were controlled, deliberate. The laughter in the cafeteria began to die down as students sensed something different in her posture. "You know what, Blake?" Kira said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room. "I'm done." Blake smiled, thinking he had finally broken her completely. "Done with what? Pretending you belong here?" "Done with you," Kira replied, and the way she said it made Blake's smile falter. "What did you just say to me?" Blake demanded, his voice rising. "I said I'm done with you," Kira repeated, wiping soup from her face with deliberate calm. "I'm done with your pathetic need to hurt people to feel important. I'm done with your racist comments. And I'm done pretending that you're anything more than a sad, insecure boy who peaked in high school." The cafeteria was dead silent now. Blake's face had gone red, his hands clenched into fists. "You think you can talk to me like that? You think you're tough now?" "I don't think I'm tough," Kira said, her voice steady. "I know I am." Blake lunged forward, his fist aimed at Kira's face. What happened next would be talked about at Jefferson High for years to come. Kira moved like water, flowing around Blake's clumsy punch with the grace of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft. Her left hand caught his wrist, redirecting his momentum, while her right elbow drove upward into his solar plexus. The impact drove the air from his lungs, leaving him gasping and doubled over, but Kira wasn't finished. As Blake stumbled backward, she spun and drove her knee into his stomach, then followed with a perfect roundhouse kick that sent him sprawling across the floor. The whole sequence took less than 5 seconds. Tyler dropped his phone, his mouth hanging open. Jessica stumbled backward, her face pale with shock. Around the cafeteria, students were on their feet, some cheering, others simply staring in amazement. Blake struggled to his feet, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. "You little..." he started to say, but Kira cut him off. "I'm not done," she said, her voice carrying a new authority. "You want to fight? Let's fight." Blake charged again, this time trying to tackle her. Kira sidestepped and used his momentum against him, throwing him over her hip in a perfect judo throw. He hit the floor hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him again. Tyler, seeing his leader getting dominated, decided to jump in. He rushed at Kira from behind, but she had been trained to fight multiple opponents. She spun, caught his arm, and twisted it behind his back while sweeping his legs. Tyler hit the floor face first, his arm pinned painfully behind him. "Stay down," Kira told him, her voice cold as ice. Tyler nodded frantically, tears of pain in his eyes. Blake had managed to get to his feet again, but he was moving more cautiously now. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by the dawning realization that he had badly underestimated his opponent. He swung wildly, but Kira ducked under his punch and drove her fist into his ribs. The crack of bone was audible across the cafeteria. Blake screamed and stumbled backward, clutching his side. He was done as a fighter, but his pride wouldn't let him quit. He pulled out his phone as if to call for help, but Kira was already moving. She leaped forward, her foot connecting with his chest in a perfect flying kick that sent him crashing into the wall. Blake slid down the wall and stayed there, gasping and defeated. For a moment, Kira stood over him, her fist raised for the finishing blow. The entire cafeteria held its breath, waiting to see if she would cross the line from defender to aggressor. But then Kira remembered her father's words about true strength. She lowered her fist and stepped back. "Stay away from me," she said. "Stay away from David. Stay away from anyone who can't defend themselves, because if you don't, I promise you this was just a warm-up." Blake nodded weakly, unable to speak. Around the cafeteria, students were applauding, but not the cruel laughter that had followed Kira's humiliation. This was genuine respect, admiration for someone who had stood up to a bully and won. David appeared at her side, his face full of awe and concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," Kira said, and for the first time in weeks, she meant it. "Actually, I'm better than fine." The aftermath was swift and decisive. Principal Martinez, who had finally shown up, tried to suspend all parties involved, but the dozens of witnesses and Tyler's own recording made it clear who the aggressor had been. Blake received a 2-week suspension and was removed from the football team. Tyler and Jessica got detention and were banned from school events for a month. Kira received a day of in-school suspension, but it was clearly a token punishment. Principal Martinez had privately told her that while the school couldn't officially condone violence, he understood that she had been defending herself against a pattern of harassment. The change in the school's social dynamics was immediate and profound. Students who had ignored Kira's suffering now approached her with apologies and respect. The hallways that had once felt like a gauntlet became simply pathways to class. Teachers who had looked the other way now nodded approvingly when they saw her. Blake returned to school 2 weeks later, his swagger gone. He walked with his head down, his broken ribs still healing. He never bothered Kira again, and when their paths crossed in the hallway, he would actually step aside to let her pass. On the Friday after the confrontation, Kira sat in her car in the school parking lot, but this time she wasn't hiding. She was waiting for David, who had asked her to the school's winter formal. As she watched students stream out of the building, she reflected on how much had changed. She had learned that sometimes the better path wasn't about avoiding conflict, but about standing up for what was right. She had discovered that her father's lessons about strength and discipline hadn't been about weakness, but about choosing the right moment to act. Most importantly, she had learned that respect wasn't something that could be demanded or taken, but something that had to be earned. David appeared at her window, his smile bright and genuine. "Ready to go?" he asked. "Ready," Kira replied, and as they drove away from Jefferson High, she felt truly free for the first time in months. She had found her strength not in violence, but in the courage to stand up for herself and others. The quiet girl, who had once been an easy target, had become someone who would never be a victim again. The story of Kira Voss and her flying elbow would become legend at Jefferson High, but more importantly, it would serve as a reminder that true strength comes not from the ability to hurt others, but from the courage to protect yourself and those you care about when all other options have been exhausted.